to Eco Action Tuesdays. I'm glad you're here. I'm Ross DePaula. I'm one of the Eco Action Tuesdays team members. And I'll point out our other team members. We have Penny, my wife, back there. She works at the public library. We have Kate taking your names over here. Linda Roberts, who's in charge of refreshments all the time. And we have Jenna in the back checking out books. So thank you for coming. I want to acknowledge our sponsor for these programs. It's Madison Gas and Electric. They give us a generous donation for helping us out with the refreshments and all that. So we're also a zero waste program. So any of your packages and things like that, we have a blue can in the back that you can drop them in there, and we will make sure they all get recycled through either the regular recycling, or we have some TerraCycle boxes at home that we put them in. So everything will get recycled. I want to mention next month's program is pollinators, native plants, and we're going to build bee houses at the Aldo Leopold Nature Center. So it should be quite an interesting program. So I hope you'll join us again for another one. And when we're finished with the presentation and before the tour, you'll have a comment card. If you could fill out your comment card or fill them out while we're during the presentation, that would be most helpful to us. It helps the library director know how we're doing with our programming. And also, there are restrooms right over here too. And before Emily gets started and I introduce her, I just wanted to mention that climate change is Eco Action Tuesday's focus, but we only refer to it once in a single sentence, during the program. The human causes and how we can help fight them are what we explore in our program. Climate change is the result of global warming, refers to long-term shifts in temperatures, weather patterns caused mainly by human activities. Climate change is intensifying Earth's water cycle, speeding up the rate at which water evaporates in one area and falls as rain or snow somewhere else. This results in worse droughts, increased extreme rainstorms and flooding. An obvious example of this is the Canadian wildfires that are affecting our air quality today. It is a result of climate change, and there's no denying that. I mean, how many of you remember, oh yeah, I remember growing up, we had wildfires in Canada all the time, bringing smoke into our state. Yeah. Here in Wisconsin, there are other effects on lakes, streams, and rivers. More frequent droughts and shifting precipitation patterns result in lower water levels, leaving less water to dilute pollutants, one of which we will talk about tonight. Two ways that salt gets in waterways are human-driven from road salt applications and salt from water softeners. Many people assume that when you apply salt to the landscape or it flows through the pipes in our houses, it just washes away and disappears. But salt accumulates in the soil and groundwater, and it takes decades to get it flushed out. How is salt harmful? Over time, increased salinity has negatively affected plants and animals that live in the water. It also negatively impacts agriculture. So, one more thing to mention, instead of take-home items, we have take-action items tonight, and some of these are these flyers up here, so you're welcome to come up and take those after the program. We also have a drawing. If you checked out a book, you will have received a little ticket, and we will draw from one of those tickets, and the winner will get, Jenna's holding it up in the back, some salt-free ice melting.
Wow.
And also, Emily has some of these salt ice cups, for spreading salt, around your driveway and walkway in a responsible manner. And then we also talked about maybe some test strips.
Yes, so they're in these envelopes with a little key to have system, so.
Okay, perfect. So you can test the hardness of your water. So with that, I will introduce Emily Jones. She is a pollution prevention specialist at the Madison Metropolitan Sewerage District. She works to protect the wastewater treatment system and downstream waters by keeping harmful substances out of the drain. She and her team develop and carry out strategies to minimize pollution to the sewer, such as training programs, grant programs, research, site inspections, and community outreach. A lifelong Madison resident, Emily has a BS from UW-Madison in Life Sciences, Communication, and Biology. So let's give a hand to Emily.
Okay, thank you, Ross, and thank you to everybody for showing up tonight. So not only am I going to be leading this presentation, but we also have pollution prevention specialist Catherine Harris helping out on our tour portion later. So she and I both work, as Ross said in the intro, on keeping things out of the sewer system that cause issues for our treatment plant for downstream waters. And one of our big focuses in that regard is chloride reduction. So as I talk tonight, I'm going to start with a little overview of the wastewater treatment process, who we are, to give some background and context, not just for the tour, but for the chloride issue and why we work so hard to prevent sources of chloride from coming to the plant in the first place. So as some background about the plant, when we say Madison Metropolitan Sewerage District, MMSD, we call ourselves the Sewerage District to avoid confusion. We cover 25 different communities. We're not part of the city of Madison. We're not part of the water utility. We're really our own public utility that collects the wastewater from this area through our sewer infrastructure and taking that wastewater to be cleaned and returned to the environment. This is called the Nine Springs Wastewater Treatment Plant here at this location. This is the one wastewater treatment plant for that area. We receive, on average, about 40 million gallons of wastewater per day. Anybody ever been to Camp Randall Stadium or another Big Ten football stadium? So if you picture that stadium about half full of sewage, that's what we're dealing with each day. So it's quite a large volume that we're receiving. And in about a day, approximately 24 hours, we treat that water and return it to the environment. During the treatment process that you'll see on the tour tonight, the treatment process is designed to remove pollutants that are associated with human waste. So that material coming to the sewer system has solids, nutrients, biological matter in it, organic matter based on plant and animal material. And there's also pathogens, obviously, in human waste that would cause a pretty hazardous condition if that wastewater were to be released to the environment untreated. So our job is to protect public health and the environment by diverting that dirty water from people's homes, keeping it out of lakes and out of our communities, and turning that essentially into river water. So if you've heard the term fishable, swimmable, that's kind of the shorthand under the Federal Clean Water Act for the target of acceptable high-quality water. Fishable in that it supports fish and other aquatic life, so there's a nice healthy ecosystem in those receiving waters, in other words, the waters that receive our treated water. And they're swimmable, meaning that humans can recreate in that water. They can fish, they can boat, they can swim, splash that water in themselves without this high risk of making themselves sick or having some other kind of adverse reaction. So what we're doing is taking in wastewater, letting it continue on the water cycle as river water. And that water will travel into larger rivers downstream, eventually make its way to the Mississippi River, to the Gulf of Mexico. So this is just one stop in this infinite water cycle. So our job is to keep that water clean enough to keep moving and protect the communities and people downstream. Wastewater treatment also involves removing the solid components from wastewater, and we can also find beneficial uses out of that. You know, we always think about wastewater as a resource if we handle it properly and if we process it properly. The solids that we remove from wastewater, you'll remember I mentioned, include organic matter and the associated nutrients like phosphorus, nitrogen. Now, I'm sure a lot of you know that when too much phosphorus, too much fertilizer gets into water bodies, it can cause those issues with blue-green algae, over-fertilize a water body to the point that we get unwanted or unhealthy plant and bacterial growth. But if we take those same nutrients and we're able to put them on land instead, then they're beneficial. So we can get this beneficial resource from the solids and wastewater by digesting them. We turn it into a product that the generic term is biosolids. Our term for it is MetroGrow. This MetroGrow fertilizer, we send out to farm fields at appropriate times of the year, incorporate that into the soil so that can help farmers' crops grow. So wastewater treatment does a really good job at treating, at removing the pollutants that are associated with sewage, with human waste. But it's not this magic system that removes everything that goes down the drain. And that's where pollution prevention comes in. Think about all the things that go down the drain, and think about the things that I mentioned that were designed to remove. And certainly there's a longer list of things that go down the drain than the contaminants I mentioned that wastewater treatment is designed to remove. And so that brings us to salt. So picture a teaspoon of salt dissolving in a glass of water. A lot easier to put in than to get out, right? So once a salt dissolves in water, there's really no way that we can remove it. We don't have the technology to do that here at the plant. And that is a challenging situation for us because we certainly receive a lot of salt. So just to clarify, this picture on this slide is not salt that we've removed from wastewater because we can't do that. This is road salt. This is just for visual scale. This is our retired pretreatment coordinator who's 6'8", standing next to a road salt pile. That's about 90 tons of salt. That's less than we get per day. We actually get about 110 tons of salt per day, which translates to about 130,000 pounds of chloride. So sodium chloride, dissolving down into its components. That chloride part of sodium chloride, just common salt, is what we're concerned about from an environmental perspective. So all of that chloride, because it's not removed, is continuing on into the streams we discharge to. And those are freshwater streams, obviously. So they're supporting species that are designed to live in fresh water. They're not adapted to live in salty water like saltwater creatures are. So once their environment starts getting too salty, it really starts to stress them out. Chloride can impact fresh water by interfering with their reproduction, with their growth. You can see side-by-side pictures of fish in less or lower chloride environments and higher chloride environments, and see that the fish in the higher chloride environments don't thrive as much. They don't get as big. I have a picture of a frog here because they're laying eggs with permeable membranes to let water in and out. And when there's salt surrounding those, that can really interfere with the equilibrium of the water inside the egg and outside of the egg. And chloride can also affect lake mixing, so affecting that natural turnover of lakes that's so crucial to their health with their seasonal patterns. And so chloride, in short, when it gets into the environment, can start to have these really negative impacts on ecosystems that are freshwater. And so, given that, wastewater treatment plants are in a position where we need to reduce chloride, can't remove it. We are regulated for chloride, though, too. This is another angle. There's a regulatory angle. That we have a permit that specifies the levels of different contaminants that we can legally discharge to the environment. And we need to keep those levels below these specified maximum thresholds, or else we run into regulatory issues. And so the district has studied what it would take to remove chloride from wastewater, and there are really no great technological options. Financially, it would be very expensive. So if we were to add removal technology, so basically adding a desalinization plant here at the treatment facility, that could raise sewer bills by anywhere from 55 to 500%. So not something that we want for the community. There are also environmental impacts associated with that. So, increased greenhouse gas emissions. We talked about climate change in the intro of this presentation. We want to minimize these additional emissions, the additional carbon footprint on the earth. And so as an alternative to facility upgrades, the district has opted to pursue pollution prevention to solve this chloride challenge. because we know that it can be prevented. We know that there's a difference between how we're using chloride now and how we could be using chloride. So how we could be using chloride is much lower than how we're using chloride now. And we believe that reducing chloride at the source can be much less expensive and have much less of that greenhouse gas environmental impact than if we were to deal with it after the fact, after it's already gone down the drain. So we at the district have really been prioritizing pollution prevention for chloride as our way to comply with our permit to protect the environment. First step of pollution prevention is to figure out where it's coming from. We had a study done for us that looked at the estimated proportions of chloride coming to the treatment plant. Now there's a distinction here that if you were to be concerned about chloride in the lakes, for instance, where's most of that coming from?
Road de-icing.
Yes, road salt, exactly, because that is running off with snowmelt, with rain, straight into the lakes. We have a wastewater-only sewer system, or at least in principle and design, our sewer system is designed to get only what's coming down the drain, which means that we do get some road salt that kind of forces its way in, but we are not designed to get that storm water. Most of what we are getting is coming from water softeners. So every time that softener regenerates in the middle of the night, that output has a lot of chloride in it, and that's coming into the sewer system and getting to the treatment plant. So you can see that almost 60% of the chloride that we get on average throughout the year is coming from water softeners. And so that may lead you to wonder, why do we even have water softeners? Why do we have these devices that are spitting chloride out constantly? Well, they do serve useful purposes. So you look at a tea kettle, got the white buildup on it, your mineral scale. That's a clue that you're in an area with hard water. In the Madison area, we have very hard water, which means it's very high in minerals like calcium and magnesium. So they aren't harmful, but they are a nuisance in that sometimes they can cause some pretty substantial issues with fixtures and appliances. So that water heater totally scaled up, it could basically build up on the heating element of a water heater, interfere with the heat transfer, you're not getting hot water, maybe it causes that water heater to fail before the end of its lifespan. Also, water softeners can just make it easier to remove soap from things. It's not reacting, or the hardness minerals are not reacting with soap, and so they're designed to prevent residue on things like dishes and clothing, skin, hair. So they do have a useful purpose. They work by basically switching the hardness particles in the source water. So as that water is pumped out of the ground and into your home, the water softener is switching the minerals with sodium from salt. This is a process called ion exchange. And so the minerals stay behind in the softener, the sodium continues on with the water into the house. Most buildings in this area have ion exchange water softeners because people don't want to deal with those scaled up water heaters, and they don't want to deal with other issues that scale can cause. And so you scale that up across our whole collection system, and you can think about the amount of salt that's being used. Every time that softener regenerates, which means it recharges itself with salt, so it continues swapping that sodium out with hardness particles, every time it regenerates, it's sending the waste chloride to the sewer system. And so if it's discharging into your floor drain or into a utility sink, something like that, all those drains will lead here to the plant with that chloride, eventually adding up to 130,000 pounds per day from all the softeners we have across the collection system. And so we are tasked with figuring out, how do we balance this utility of water softeners with the fact that we get too much salt from them now, too much chloride from them now. So in pollution prevention, we've really been focused on this end goal of using less salt, and there are two main categories of getting there. One is making water softening more efficient, and the other is to use less softened water. So since this is about eco-action, the rest of this presentation will talk about actions that you can take to reduce your salt use at home, give you some ideas for things that you could try if you're not already doing them. Softening efficiency. So the first way increasing softening efficiency, we liken to buying a more efficient car or any more efficient appliance. So just like all these different areas that have improved as technology has improved. So as cars have figured out how to use gas more efficiently, and appliances have figured out how to use energy more efficiently, so have water softeners learned how to use salt more efficiency, or I should say have been made to use salt more efficiently. They just have improved components, improved design that lets them go farther on the same amount of salt. So if you think about the analogy to cars, so 1 pound of salt in this really beaten down old softener is going to soften less water and therefore have to use more salt more frequently than a newer high efficiency softener, just like an old junky car is going to have a lower miles per gallon than a more efficient newer car. And so there are some indicators in water softeners that can help you evaluate its efficiency and figure out how yours is operating. You can look at how the softener regenerates itself, how old it is, the type of softener it is, and its settings. Now, because we have a lot to cover tonight, I'm not going to go into great detail about all of these, but I will direct you to some resources that you can use at home to compare your softener to some of these categories, but we'll go into a few. So does anybody have a softener that looks like this, if you can remember off the top of your head? Okay, one time, that's good. These are kind of a relic of the past. So when we say a softener regenerates, like I said, that's when it refills itself up with sodium and it sends waste chloride to the sewer system, which means the more it regenerates, the more chloride we're going to get. And a day regeneration softener, also called a time clock softener, regenerates itself every set number of days regardless of how much water's been softened. So if your softener is programmed to regenerate every 6 days and you're on vacation for 7 days, it's just going to dump a bunch of salt into the sewer system despite not having softened any water. And so these are a less efficient type of softener than what are called demand-initiated regeneration softeners. Most new softeners are that type, but we know that these are still out there. If you have a softener, if you go home and you look and see it's got like a wheel of pins, maybe in the single digits, maybe in the double digits, with a label that says day, that's key. So that's indicating a number of days that govern the regeneration, and that means it's a time clock. And if you can, we recommend getting those out of there. We want all the time clocks in our area out of the collection system and replaced with a new, more efficient softener. Another easy way, a rule of thumb of evaluating your softener, if your softener is 15, 20 years old, it's at the end of its lifespan, because those softener components kind of get beaten up, they wear down over time, they lose efficiency. And so again, if you can, if your softener is older than 15 years, we recommend that you get that replaced with a newer, more efficient model. And when you say, which model should I get? Basically, any new model is going to be more efficient than these old ones. It is important to get those programs appropriately. Different softeners can be set up with more efficient settings and less efficient settings. We have a list of softener service providers and plumbers that have been through a training on softener efficiency, and so I can provide that afterwards if you want to talk to a softener provider or a plumber who's familiar with the best practices that we've been recommending. And you can also find information on our water softener self-screen. Out of curiosity, have any of you taken this survey? So this is something that we put together to help guide people in generally assessing their water softeners. So let me tell you, there's a lot of different variables that go into water softeners, so we don't have a perfect specific recommendation every time. But this is a way to get started on assessing your salt use at home and your water softener and get some recommendations on how you might reduce your salt use. This is also something I can send out for sharing with your group. But if you go to madsewer.org on our chloride page, we have a self-screen tool that you can access. You can choose to submit that information so we can get a better idea of the condition of softeners in our area, or you can just take it for your own knowledge. But this is a tool that we're hoping helps people jumpstart action on their softeners. Now, the other category of using less salt is to soften less water. And so this is a broad category. There are different things that you can do, and this is what I'll focus on for the rest of the presentation here. Because a lot of this comes down to changing the status quo, changing the norms about how we have softened water. And so some of this may seem kind of new, but we really want to stress that this comes down to personal preference. So some people might prefer a certain level of softness in their water. Other people may be able to live without that. And so I'll talk about how that comes into play in softening water and how that relates to your overall salt use. So it may sound a little intuitive, but the less water that you soften, the less salt is needed. So the less chloride is coming to the treatment plants. But historically, homes might have only softened the hot water in their house with the primary goal of protecting the water heater. So scale buildup, that hard mineral buildup, forms more easily in hot water than it does cold water. And so in some older homes, anecdotally I've heard around my neighborhood on the Isthmus that a lot of homes have hot-only softened water. And then the cold water just has the same mineral content as it came out of the ground. And so that's going to things like the toilet, cold water faucets, and is getting mixed back in with hot water in showers and that kind of warm water application. But there was a shift a few decades ago to builders were then softening both the hot water and the cold water. So basically everything but the kitchen sink. So typically the kitchen sink is left cold hard because people don't necessarily want to be drinking soft water, but everything else is softened. When I say soften, it means it has 0 grains of hardness. Grains is just a measure of the amount of minerals in water. So 0 grains of hardness means that water is totally soft. So there's no in between. There's either hard water or there's just no hardness. So our big question, is this really necessary? Do we really need to have this all or nothing approach to softening? I have this chart up here of how much water we use to just take a consideration of the impact on softening only certain systems could have on overall salt use. So a toilet is approximately 1/4 of the water use in a home, or toilets are. And so if we weren't softening water going to the toilet, that could save our salt use by 25% proportionally. So there's some room for reduction just in the amount of water that we soften. One of the key steps that we want people to take is to make sure that their outdoor water is not softened, and that's where those hardness test strips come into play. So that hose bib, the outdoor faucet that goes to, gardening water, maybe use the hose to wash your car or something like that. So that really should not be softened water, especially because if you're watering your garden with outdoor water, you don't want all the sodium to be getting into your garden. There's no reason for that water to be softened, but sometimes there are custom plumbing configurations. Maybe somebody wanted to wash their car with soft water and requested their outdoor hose be connected to the softener. And maybe they moved out and you moved in and you're like, why is my outdoor hose connected to the softener? This doesn't make any sense. And so we really, really advocate for people not softening their outdoor water because that, if you're using a lot of water outdoors, according to the EPA, that can be 30% of a home's water use in some cases. That is going through a lot more salt than you need to. And so there are a few ways you can test for whether your outdoor hose bib is softened or not. And this goes for not just your outdoor hose bib, but any faucet, any water source in your home. We have these hardness test strips that you just take a little cupful of water. You don't put the strip underneath running water, but rather dip it into a collected sample and compare the color of that strip to the key, and that'll tell you if that water is soft or hard. And if it is soft, especially coming out of the hose bib, we'd want you to call a plumber, get that taken off the softener. Another way, if any of you use Dr. Bronner's or another one of those like pure liquid soaps that don't have any foaming agents in them that help them lather. So this is an easy test to do at home. Just take some of that liquid soap, put it into a sample of water from a faucet, and then shake it up, with the cap on real tight. And if it suds like that, that's soft water because, like I said, soft water can help soap lather more readily. Meanwhile, this is from my bathroom sink, and this is from my kitchen sink. So you can see the difference there, that the hard water just kind of became opaque and murky with that liquid soap added, and the soft water had a lot of suds form right away. I mentioned that scale forms more easily in hot water and cold water. So one option to reduce your salt use overall is to remove various fixtures from the softener, especially if they only use cold water like a toilet. Now, this could come down to personal preference, because I've talked to plumbers who are wary about this idea because they've seen toilets get a lot of scale built up in them, maybe affecting some of their components. But if that doesn't bother you and you're willing to do a lot of scrubbing, and you're saying, you know what, I would rather clean my toilet more and save some salt, then we really defer to individuals' preferences rather than assuming that everybody wants everything soft all the time. So this is another thing to consider, because taking the cold water off the softener would be a huge proportional salt reduction compared to softening both hot and cold water in a home. And so this would be a really high impact. So, going back to that 25%, if you plumbed hard cold water to toilets, you could reduce your salt use by 25%. It may cause scale buildup in your toilet, but again, what is your preference? If you're fine with cleaning more, if the scale doesn't bother you, that is an option. Now, here's another option that we have been pushing a lot, or we've been exploring a lot recently, because it's kind of a compromise between this all or nothing, all soft, all hard. Blending valves come standard with some softeners and also can be added on to several types of softeners in our area pretty easily and pretty inexpensively. So that basically mixes some hard water back into soft water after going around the softener. So a blending valve is going to mix some hard water back into soft water, which will result in an overall mostly soft water, just not 0 grain per gallon soft. And so that's a way for you to calibrate a level of softness that's still going to be protective of your appliances and fixtures, and it's going to use less salt. And so, we've been working with Dave Jones Plumbing to pilot these. These are something that maybe are an alternative option to replacing a new softener. So a blending valve can be a pretty inexpensive thing, just come out in one plumbing call. So if it's not in the cards for you right now to buy a high efficiency softener, then maybe consider having a plumber install a blending valve, bringing your overall water hardness up to like 5 grains per gallon, which is comparable to what you might find naturally in cities like Milwaukee or Green Bay, which are using lake water, not as many minerals, not as hard, and they get by without softeners in that case, and that could still significantly reduce your salt use.
Question?
Yeah.
Is that different than the hardness setting that you set?
Mm-hmm. That is different. So the question is that different from a hardness setting? It is. So a hardness setting is basically telling your softener how hard the water is coming into it, which tells it how often to regenerate. It's using it as part of a calculation to say this many gallons of water have passed through the softener that contain this many grains of hardness, and so I've reached my capacity and I need to regenerate. And a blending valve you can think of as almost setting the softness of the water. So you could work with a plumber to say, I'm fine with 4 grains per gallon of hardness in my water as opposed to 0. So then they would divert whatever quantity of hard water around the softener that would result in an average of 4 grains per gallon in the water in your house. And you could bring that up. I mean, we're advocating for people to kind of experiment with it to see what level of hardness is their preference. Again, back to people's preference. And I use the example of those like Lake Michigan coastal communities because it is an example of places where water softeners are not used by everybody and people get by just fine. And the water hardness there can get up to like 7 or 8 grains per gallon. And so if you compare that to Madison, which is like 20-25, it's about a third. And so if you brought your water hardness up to that, you could reduce your salt use by about a third. So we have some information about that on our website for some more detail for you to consider. We always get this question. So, if water softeners have this pronounced impact on freshwater quality, so why do we use them? Aren't there alternatives? There are. I mean, I just took a screenshot of what you can find just Googling salt-free conditioners or salt-free softeners on like Amazon or something like that. We I was telling Ross this beforehand, that we kind of have a measured, vague positivity about them, but we aren't at the point where we know enough about them to make specific recommendations, like, yes, go out and get this. We don't have a lot of good data or a lot of good examples of salt-free water conditioners working on water as hard as it is in our area. And we don't want to be giving people recommendations that are going to leave them like, well, the sewerage district told me to put this thing in and it didn't work, and now my water heater died. We do want people to, research these systems. If you are comfortable putting one in and you're comfortable with the risk, go right ahead. But we're still waiting to get more strong data about how these work before making a, affirmative recommendation about them. And I wanted to give this comparison to show the effect. Don't pay too much attention to the numbers at the top. This is just to show the effect of these different configurations on the overall salt use. So if we're imagining that we're 3 houses on the same street, they have the same source water wells, which means they have the same hardness, and one has a really high efficiency water softener and softens most of their water. One has a pretty mediocre efficiency water softener and softens only 60% of their water, and one with both a high efficiency softener and only softening a proportion of their water. You can see that you can get the same result as a high efficiency softener by dropping down the percentage of the water that you're softening, even if your softener isn't very high performing. So they're still using a little under a bag of salt per month. Meanwhile, if you're able to combine both, we're operating at about 1/3 of that. So just to show how we can get to using less salt with different options that might work for different people. So just to recap that, it's all about your preference. There are different options that you can explore to reduce your salt use if you haven't taken any of these steps before. We have a lot of resources about it that I can provide after this session. And I'll just end on, I don't want to overlook road salt. We tend to focus on softeners as the main source of chloride to our treatment plant, but certainly road salt still affects us. It still pushes its way into our sewer system. We can see these peaks, in fact, in the late winter, early spring when things start to melt, carrying road salt into the sewer system. And so that can really put us at risk of exceeding our permit limit in those winter times. And so we are encouraging people who put down road salt to move away from something like this, which we've all seen, to a much more scientifically calibrated, appropriate for conditions road salt application method. So have you all heard of Wisconsin Saltwise? Yeah, this is a pretty recognizable name, so we're pleased to see that taking off. The district convened Wisconsin Saltwise several years ago with some other municipalities and organizations who have an interest in reducing road salt. So like municipal stormwater agencies, the university, Public Health Madison-Dane County, to try to move away from excessive salting to the right amount of salt or the right winter maintenance practices, which may or may not involve salt. So if you are applying road salt at home, Wisconsin Saltwise promotes the shovel, scatter, switch method, which is using a shovel or ice scraper before you do anything chemical. Do as much physical removal of snow and ice before putting down any chemical. Scatter, which is why I have these little cups here. These are a little guideline of how much salt to use on your sidewalk or on your driveway. This is a 12-ounce cup, so approximately enough salt for about 10 sidewalk squares in some conditions. Just kind of your rule of thumb for how much salt to use as you're putting that down. And to switch to a different de-icer, you see that type over there, when conditions are appropriate for that. So, common road salt really stops working below about 15 degrees Fahrenheit, or if it works really, really slowly and is functionally not that effective. And so there are other types of salts, other types of ice melters that could actually work, so you're not just putting salt down unnecessarily. Did you have a question about that?
Yeah, why not just push for using sand, period?
Well, there's not a perfect solution. So sand doesn't melt snow and ice. It provides traction But, if we're needing to get rid of ice on a sidewalk, it can be kind of pushed to the side as people walk over it, and it doesn't provide that same melting that salt would. It also itself can be a contaminant, because as that sediment gets washed into storm drains, it's adding the particulate matter, the suspended solids, into the lakes. And so it has some limited utility in some situations, but it's not going to replace salt. Mm-hmm.
So how do you get companies to not put so much salt down? Because that's what I see. I don't
Yeah.
have control over them. I might say to them, you could probably just use a cup for 20 feet, but then they've just got these huge,
So that's a great question. So how can we get companies to use less salt? So one of the big fears that companies have is liability, especially if there's a lot of foot traffic in front of a business, they don't want to get sued if somebody slips on that. So actually there is a bill in the legislature right now. I don't remember what the exact status is. So Wisconsin Saltwise now has a full-time coordinator, Madison, and she's been working very hard to advocate for this liability protection. So basically, I believe this is the case, I might want to fact check this. The bill says that if road salt applicators go through basically a sanctioned training that focuses on the right amount of salt to use, that gives them some liability protection if they were to encounter one of those situations. But there have been, beyond that, policy angle, Saltwise and other partners have been promoting training for road salt applicators, like Bruce Company, Barnes, a lot of different applicators and municipal applicators too have gone through these trainings, gotten this certification to understand the appropriate salt application practices in different conditions. So yeah, there's a lot of barriers to overcome, but there's work being done to overcome them.
You ought to have the Culligan people sitting here. I have a farm. It was in the family farm for 100 years. A little bit different here, I know, because it's a septic system. And what happened is the tenant, Culligan contacted him. The tenant put in soft water there, and how it affects the septic. Generally, you can't put salt water in a septic. Matter of fact, there's some states that have a law against that. And the thing is, what do you do with that salt water? First of all, it's the best tasting water if it's not, you understand? But if you put the salt out on the grass, it's going to kill the grass and it's going to permanently affect the soil. You're killing the soil there, and and it's going to. How do you cure that problem? You'd have to take all the soil off, and you understand what I'm saying?
Yeah, I do understand what you're saying, and I think that's why we've really been prioritizing working with the softener companies and the softener industry too. So just like we've had trainings for road salt applicators, we've been having trainings for the water softener companies. We've really been emphasizing to them, look, this is the stakes, this is the outcome that water softeners are having, and so we've been encouraging them to change practices, and we have worked with them on a lot of projects to increase water softening efficiency, to promote softener optimization, to really understand those practices that will result in less salt being used. So, I can't speak specifically to the septic situations. I think that in those cases, it's a balance of, what people may assume people like or what their preferences would be. And I think that just comes back to, if it is a homeowner's preference to soften less water, then we want to provide the resources that they can say to their provider, look, I don't want this to be softened, or I want to just soften hot water or something like that, rather than just the assumption the customer always wants all soft water. Because just like the barrier for road salt applicators, there's a fear with the water softener professionals, if we soften less and people's water heater dies, or if they aren't happy with their water quality, then they're going to be mad at us. And so, we want to change this norm so people they can have that confidence that this is what consumers want, this is what their customers want to reduce their salt use, and not just do the same application every time. I'm gonna do a quick time check just to make sure we can get out on our tour. Because I just have, I mean, that's basically the end of what I have here. So, yeah, in conclusion, we can all keep our water fresh. We want to keep our little model scope and friend from one of our receiving waters, just to reinforce that we're doing this for the protection of the fishery, for the protection of other aquatic life, keeping those streams and ecosystems healthy and free from excessive salt. So I think that we can take a few questions on the tour itself, just to make sure that we can cover some ground. So Catherine and I are going to split into two groups. And because it is less than ideal conditions out there today, we'll do one group that takes a longer tour. And if anybody's more comfortable taking kind of an abbreviated tour, you can go with Catherine, just so you don't have to spend so much time outdoors in the smokiness. But regardless, we can both answer questions about our chloride program, about other pollution prevention topics, and the wastewater treatment process in general.